The scream of tearing metal was the last sound anyone expected at 38,000 feet. It wasn't a clean bang, but a deep, guttural rip, as if the sky itself were being torn in two. Panic ignited instantly, a wildfire of shrieks and gasps that consumed the pressurized calm of the cabin. Passengers grabbed for each other, for armrests, for anything solid in a world that had suddenly betrayed them. But in seat 17C, a 16-year-old girl named Anya Sharma remained perfectly still. While chaos erupted around her, she simply closed her eyes for a single, measured second, her expression unreadable. To the terrified passengers of Delta Flight 305, she was just another kid in a gray hoodie, lost in her own world. They couldn't have been more wrong. This tiny vibration Anya had felt just minutes before would be the first domino to fall in a chain reaction that would threaten the lives of all 295 souls on board. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now, back to our story. Anya sat by the window, looking like any other teenager on a cross-country flight from San Francisco to New York. Earbuds nestled in her ears, a worn backpack crammed under the seat ahead. Mrs. Gable, the kind-eyed woman in 17B, had tried to make small talk earlier. "First time flying by yourself, dear?" she'd asked with a warm, grandmotherly smile. Anya had offered a polite, quiet smile in return. "Something like that, ma'am." Then she'd turned back to her phone, a picture of teenage disinterest. Mrs. Gable assumed she was scrolling through social media or listening to music, a safe bet, but entirely wrong. What Mrs. Gable couldn't see was that Anya's screen wasn't displaying a music app. It was filled with the intricate hydraulic schematics of an Airbus A330. When she sensed eyes on her, she'd flick her thumb, and the screen would instantly switch to a generic playlist. This was a dance she'd perfected. Anya Sharma wasn't just any teenager. She was the daughter of the late Colonel Raj Phoenix Sharma, a legendary test pilot in the Air Force, a man whose name was spoken with a mix of reverence and awe at air bases around the world. He died 2 years prior in a flight test accident, a tragedy that had left a void in the aviation community and a gaping hole in Anya's heart. The Sharma family legacy was written in the sky. Her great-grandfather flew transports over the Himalayas in World War II. Her grandfather was a decorated pilot in Vietnam. Her father was a Top Gun instructor, a man who could make an aircraft do things that defied physics. Anya had grown up not with fairy tales, but with flight manuals. Her lullabies were the sounds of jet engines. While her friends were learning to drive cars, she was mastering emergency checklists in a flight simulator her dad had built in their garage. She knew this Airbus A330 better than some of the people who flew it for a living, but it was a secret she guarded fiercely. As Flight 305 had ascended to its cruising altitude over the Sierra Nevadas, Anya had felt the familiar, comforting press of G-forces. She loved this aircraft, its complex fly-by-wire systems, its redundant safety protocols. She knew its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. Up in the cockpit, Captain Eva Rostova and her first officer, Ben Carter, were running through their cruise checks, completely oblivious to the prodigy sitting in their passenger cabin. A flight attendant named Maria offered drinks. "Just water, thank you," Anya had said, her voice even and calm. Maria noted the girl's politeness, a refreshing change from the monosyllabic teens she usually encountered. She saw a well-mannered young woman. What she couldn't see was the hyper-awareness behind those dark eyes, the military discipline ingrained in every gesture. 3 hours into the flight, somewhere over the vast plains of Nebraska, it started. A low-frequency vibration, almost imperceptible. We've all had that moment on a flight, right? That little bump of turbulence that makes your stomach jump. This wasn't that. This was different. A harmonic imbalance, Most people wouldn't notice, but Anya's entire life had been a training course in noticing. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. An airplane always talks to you, Anya. You just have to learn its language. This A330 was starting to whisper a warning. She slipped out an earbud, tilting her head, listening past the cabin noise to the deep thrum of the twin Rolls-Royce engines. There it was. A subtle change in the pitch of the portside engine. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She surreptitiously opened her phone again, pulling up the A330's technical manual, her thumb scrolling through the engine failure procedures her father had drilled into her memory until they were as familiar as her own name. Then came the scream of tearing metal. At 2:47 p.m. Central Time, the port engine didn't just fail, it detonated. A violent explosion sent shrapnel tearing through the wing. The aircraft jolted violently to the left, pinning passengers against their windows and sending unsecured objects flying. While screams filled the cabin and Mrs. Gable next to her began to pray, clutching a rosary, Anya was already processing. Her mind was a flurry of calculations: altitude, airspeed, location over rural Ohio. An A330 could glide, yes, but for how long? Based on the severity of the jolt, she knew this wasn't a simple flameout. This was a catastrophic, uncontained engine failure. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford yet. Captain Rostova's voice, strained but steady, crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced a mechanical issue. Please remain in your seats with your seat belts fastened. The cabin crew will provide further instructions." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that the shrapnel from the engine had shredded hydraulic lines. They weren't just flying on one engine, they were flying a crippled bird with bleeding control surfaces. Maria, the flight attendant, moved down the aisle, her professional mask hiding her own fear. When she reached Anya's row, she expected to see a terrified teenager. Instead, she found Anya calmly showing a panicked Mrs. Gable how to properly tighten her life vest, even though they were thousands of miles from the nearest ocean. "Are you all right, sweetie?" Maria asked, her voice a little shaky. "I'm fine," Anya replied, her gaze sharp and focused. "But you should check on the gentleman in 10D. His breathing is shallow and he looks pale. He might be going into shock." Maria blinked. How had this girl, in the middle of this chaos, noticed something she, a trained professional, had missed? She glanced over and saw the man exactly as Anya described. She hurried over, a new sense of unease settling over her. This was no ordinary teenager. In the cockpit, it was a battle. "I'm losing hydraulics in System Blue," Ben Carter reported, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. "Backup in yellow is intermittent. Eva, the bus is fighting me." Captain Rostova wrestled with the side stick, the aircraft responding with sluggish, frightening delays. "We're a brick with wings, Ben." What they didn't know was that their distress call had already been picked up by NORAD. An airliner in trouble over the continental U.S. triggers an immediate military response. 2 F-16 Vipers from the 180th Fighter Wing were scrambled, call signs Viper and Hawk. Major Kate Viper Sullivan and Captain Leo Hawk Davies were in the air in under 5 minutes, afterburners screaming as they punched a hole in the sky, rocketing toward the wounded airliner. "Control, Viper and Hawk are supersonic. ETA to intercept is 6 minutes, Sullivan reported, her voice the epitome of calm professionalism. Back on Flight 305, a second softer thud echoed through the fuselage. It was less dramatic than the first explosion, but to Anya, it was far more terrifying. It was the sound of a secondary system failing. She could feel it in the floor, the way the plane yawed sluggishly. Her mental checklist was running red. They were losing altitude too fast. Mrs. Gable was now sobbing quietly, trying to text her son. "It won't go through," she cried. Anya gently placed a hand on her arm. "We're too high for a steady signal, ma'am," she explained, her tone impossibly soothing. Don't worry. The pilots have multiple radio systems. They're already talking to the ground. Mrs. Gable stared at her, her tear-filled eyes wide with confusion. How do you know all this? Anya paused. The time for secrets was over. My father was a pilot, she said, the understatement of the century. What she didn't say was that she had analyzed dozens of accident reports, studying the chain of events that led to disaster, looking for the single decision that could have changed everything. At 3:08 p.m., the F-16s arrived. Control. Viper has visual on Delta 305, Major Sullivan reported, her fighter jet a silent, menacing shadow off the Airbus's wounded wing. Confirming major damage to the port engine and trailing edge of the left wing. They're venting fluid. Looks like hydraulic fluid. They're in a shallow but unstable descent. Inside the cockpit, Captain Rostova was out of good options. Ben, I don't think we can make it to Cleveland, she said, her voice low. The hydraulics are shot. The backups are failing. We're losing control authority by the second. It was in that moment that Anya Sharma made a choice. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Mrs. Gable gasped. Maria, hurrying down the aisle, saw her, and her eyes flashed with alarm. Miss, sit down, now, she commanded, her voice sharp. Anya met her gaze, her own eyes blazing with an intensity that stopped Maria in her tracks. I need to speak to the pilots, she said, not as a request, but as a statement of fact. That's why I need to talk to them, Anya repeated, her voice cutting through the noise and fear. I can help. Maria moved to block her path, a wall of airline policy and procedure. You need to return to your seat immediately. What could you possibly know that our captain, with 20 years of experience, doesn't? There was no arrogance in Anya's reply. Only a quiet, desperate certainty. More than you think, she said, her voice dropping slightly. My call sign is Phoenix. The name hung in the air, electric. Maria froze. She wasn't military, but she had worked enough military charter flights to have heard the whispers. Phoenix. A legendary name. A ghost in the machine of the Air Force. A dynasty of pilots. The pieces clicked into place in her mind. The impossible calm, the technical knowledge, the bearing of a soldier in a teenager's body. You're Raj Sharma's daughter, she whispered. Anya gave a single sharp nod, a gesture learned from a lifetime among men and women in uniform. And his aircraft needs help. Without another word, Maria stepped aside. Anya walked toward the cockpit, her stride steady and purposeful, a small island of calm in a sea of terror. Passengers stared as she passed, a mix of confusion and nascent hope on their faces. She reached the cockpit door and knocked with a specific rhythmic pattern. The coded knock her father had taught her, the universal sign-off for aviators. Friendly. Captain Rostova looked up, annoyed, as Maria's voice came over the intercom. Captain, there's a passenger here. She says she can help. She says she's Phoenix. The effect on Rostova was profound. Every pilot knew the stories. If Raj Sharma's daughter was on her plane and said she could help, by God, she was going to listen. Let her in, she commanded. Anya stepped into the cockpit. She was 16, surrounded by a universe of blinking lights and complex controls, yet her eyes scanned the instrument panel with the swift, practiced gaze of a veteran. Status, Captain? She asked, her voice devoid of fear. Rostova, stunned but desperate, gave her the grim summary. Uncontained engine failure, catastrophic hydraulic loss, failing backups, degrading flight controls. Anya processed it all, her mind a supercomputer cross-referencing the data with thousands of hours of study. Have you considered Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? She asked. It's closer than Cleveland, longer runways, and full crash and rescue capabilities for heavy, damaged aircraft. Ben Carter stared at her. How do you know that? Anya's gaze didn't waver. I've memorized the specs of every major airfield in a 500-mile radius. It's what my father taught me to do. Prepare for the unthinkable. Rostova was already changing their course on the flight management system. "Brilliant, Ben. Get me right, Pat. Approach control." She turned back to Anya. "What else?" Anya pointed to a small gauge flickering erratically. "Your backup hydraulic pressure is fluctuating. It suggests a secondary leak, probably from shrapnel in the fuselage. If that system goes, you'll be down to manual reversion, and on a plane this size, that's almost no control at all." The two pilots exchanged a look of disbelief and dawning respect. Outside, Major Sullivan and Captain Davies watched the Airbus begin its slow turn. "Control, Viper reporting. Target is diverting toward Wright-Patterson." Then, a new voice cut through the emergency frequency, a voice that was young, female, and impossibly calm. "Wright-Pat approach. This is Phoenix aboard Delta 305. We are declaring an emergency. Descending through 24,000 with multiple system failures. Requesting immediate clearance for runway 23L. The F-16 pilots were thunderstruck. They'd grown up on stories of Phoenix. The call sign had been retired, a symbol of a fallen hero. "Control, did that transmission just come from the airliner?" Hawk asked, his voice tight. "Who is using that call sign?" The air traffic controller was just as confused. "Unknown station identifying as Phoenix, please state your authority." Anya's voice came back, crisp and clear. "Right, Pat. Phoenix is a passenger aboard Delta 305, assisting the flight crew. Call sign inherited by lineage." A stunned silence filled the airwaves. Then Major Sullivan's voice, laced with a reverence that defied protocol. "Phoenix, this is Viper. We are your escort. It is an honor to hear that call sign in the sky again. How can we assist?" Inside the cockpit, Rostova and Carter looked at Anya with new eyes. This wasn't just a smart kid. This was aviation royalty. "Viper, Phoenix acknowledges," Anya said, her voice gaining a new weight. "Coordinate with the tower. We're going to need everyone ready on the ground." "Roger, Phoenix." "It's already done," Sullivan replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father taught my first CO. We've got your 6. For a split second, the armor cracked. The mention of her father, here, now, almost broke her. She wasn't Phoenix. She was just a 16-year-old girl who missed her dad. But she shoved the feeling down, compartmentalizing it the way he had taught her. "Thank you, Viper," she said, her voice a little softer. "Let's bring her home." The approach to Wright-Patterson was a nightmare. The Airbus, with its failing controls, wallowed through the air. Anya stood between the pilots, calling out instrument readings they were too busy to monitor. "Hydraulic pressure down to 40%. Backup system is in the red." At 8,000 feet, the final hydraulic system gave out with a sickening shudder. The controls went dead. "We've lost it," Rostova said, her voice grim. "We're a glider." Anya's mind raced, searching for one last, desperate option from her father's lessons. "Captain, differential thrust," she said urgently. "The starboard engine is still good. Use its power to steer the plane. It's a long shot, but it's all we have." It was an incredibly dangerous maneuver, something test pilots trained for, not commercial captains. "That's insane," Carter muttered, but Rostova saw the logic. "It's brilliant," she breathed. "Phoenix, talk me through it." What followed would become the stuff of aviation legend. Captain Rostova, a pilot of incredible skill, and Anya Sharma, a 16-year-old with the knowledge of a master aviator, worked in perfect sync. Anya called out airspeed and altitude, her voice a steady beacon in the storm of alarms, while Rostova delicately manipulated the throttle of the single working engine, steering the 200-ton aircraft with minute adjustments of power. 500 feet, airspeed 150 knots, Anya called. "Rate of descent is high. Add 2% thrust." 30 feet, idle thrust. "Hold her steady, Captain." The Airbus slammed onto the runway, hard. It bounced once, a terrifying skip, before the landing gear held. Tires screamed in protest as Rostova used reverse thrust and emergency braking to slow the crippled giant. Fire trucks and ambulances raced alongside them, surrounding the plane in a cocoon of flashing lights as it finally rolled to a stop. A wave of applause and sobs swept through the cabin. In the cockpit, there was only a profound, exhausted silence. Rostova turned to Anya, her face streaked with sweat, her eyes filled with awe. "Phoenix," she said, her voice choked with emotion. We wouldn't have made it. Thank you." Anya's knees felt weak, the adrenaline finally leaving her. "You were the one flying, Captain," she managed. "My father always said a great pilot finds a way." As passengers stumbled down the emergency slides into the organized chaos on the tarmac, the story began to spread. The quiet girl in 17C. Mrs. Gable grabbed Anya's hand at the bottom of the slide, tears of gratitude on her face. "You're a hero." Anya just shook her head. "I just did what my father taught me to do." Later, in a makeshift passenger lounge, two figures in flight suits approached her, Major Sullivan and Captain Davies. "Phoenix," Viper said, offering a hand, her gaze filled with a warrior's respect. "It was an honor flying on your wing." "Your dad would be so damn proud," Hawk added, his voice cracking slightly. Anya shook their hands, her composure regained. "Thank you for the escort," she said. "Wingmen always have your back," Viper replied with a small smile. As Anya waited for a new flight to continue her journey, a text message lit up her phone. It was from the current commander of her father's old squadron. "Phoenix, heard what you did. The legacy is in good hands. HUA." On the next flight, sitting by another window, Anya felt a sense of peace. She was no longer just a girl hiding a secret. She was Phoenix, a title she had earned not by birth, but by fire. She put her earbuds in, gazed out at the endless sea of stars, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt her father flying right there beside her. Make sure to subscribe to Skybound Stories and check out our other amazing stories by clicking the videos on your screen right now.